First up, what we're going to cover today is these areas. I'm not going to necessarily cover them in order, and what I will try to do is draw out why some of them are important. I just wanted to get a little bit of a feel for the room. It doesn't matter whether you're in a law firm or not in a law firm. If you think of your own organisation, I want you to rate its maturity from managing change perspective. So, a show of hands, which of you think your organisation absolutely has change licked? They understand the science behind it, they work hard at making sure that science is followed, and they have a pretty good track record of successfully delivering change. So hands up in that group. Okay, we've got none. It might be. Okay, that kind of middle tier then, so which of your organisations have got a pretty good feeling and understanding what they need to do to implement change, sometimes get it right, sometimes get it wrong, but have pretty good intentions. So a show of hands on that. Oh, I'm going for about 50%, maybe a little bit more. And then so finally, I'm assuming the remainder of you are in organisations that are really trying to learn how to deal with and develop that change. And I won't ask you to put up your hands at all there. Just to give you some context, I'm going to try and illustrate some of the things I'm going to say by reference to recent experience, and particularly experience in setting up some shared service teams and sort of large tranches of outsourced client work. Historically, I've also had a lot of experience in doing a lot of process re-engineering, sort of insourcing, outsourcing, all those sort of things. And so I'll draw from all of that as I sort of see fit going through. In terms of my qualifications to do this, I'm kind of like a little bit like Wurzel Gummidge. I don't know if those of you who are of a certain age who remember Wurzel Gummidge. I've been a practitioner. I've been a non-fee earning partner. It's fun being one of those, I can tell you. I've been worked within an LPO, and now I'm working as an employee in a different law firm. And so I've had the privilege of seeing the professions from lots of different angles. I think what qualifies me to talk about this most is I've made stacks and stacks and stacks of mistakes along the way. I have been involved in business change projects in law firms since about 1997, and yes, that's 19, not 18. And throughout the whole of that period, I've made loads and loads of mistakes, and I'm still making them today. And I'm not particularly proud of that, but I do try my best to learn from them. And I think one of the things that I did learn fairly early on was that if I was able to control stuff, then there was a fair chance I could get it done. But I also learned when it came to any kind of major changes within the business, there was more and more of the stuff I needed to control I couldn't. And actually, not only did I have an indirect influence on it, quite often I had a very remote influence on it. So it became very, very difficult. So for any of you, and I think most lawyers fall into the control freak category, as unfortunately do most people who are involved in business change in law, it's a bit of a challenging environment. And what are the challenges? I'm not claiming this is a comprehensive list in any way, shape or form. It's my list, and there's some of the things that I've learned along the way. The one thing you'll notice about everything on that list is it's all people related. Some of them sort of stand out as obvious: fear and suspicion, overcoming people's fear and suspicion. The WIIFM, the what's in it for me, the very human component of why should I change, as a very people-driven thing. And also the kind of the personal pressures, the capacity, the client work. I haven't got time to do the stuff you want me to do to help change this business because I've got this fee-earning stuff to do, and that's how my performance is judged. So some very, very personal things. Impatience is the next area, and I think law firms suffer from an incredible amount of impatience, and often understandably so because they're asked to deal with client demands. However, this impatience is a context of lawyers are doers. So you know what needs to be done, just get on and do it. Implement the system. make the business change, do the restructure. It's straight to action without any really thinking about preparing the environment or actually giving people chance to get accustomed to the change. The other bit here is firms not ready. And again, this is an environmental factor. So quite often, the firm and people within it have no sense of why they need to change right now. Why do they have to do what you're asking them to do right now? And also, their opinions may well be coloured and jaded by the fact that the firm has tried to do things previously and not made a particularly good job of it. So history will inevitably colour their thoughts. Complacency is the next one to pick out. We all still bear the scars of the global financial crisis. I haven't been to a seminar in the last few weeks or in the last couple of years when that hasn't been mentioned. And even though we bear the scars, there's a lot of recovery that's taken place, and right now most firms are saying they're in a place of confidence. It's really difficult to get firms to change when everything is going okay. Why should they change? What's the rationale for change? Ownership as well here is a very big thing when it comes to leadership of change. The problem is that within a law firm, people do tend to be slightly siloed. They tend to focus on their area of specialism, their client, their team. And inevitably, when you're talking about sort of any significant business change, it normally cuts across all of those things. So finding a genuinely altruistic owner who is going to forsake their own interests for the benefit of the wider business is often a difficult thing. And also, sometimes firms will see the job of effecting change as being of the managing partner or the head of IT, the head of HR. If they have a head of transformation or a head of business change, it's their job. And inevitably, those individuals, that change tends to be mostly project-based. It tends to be the one-night stand for us. We don't always have to live with the operational outcome, the marriage, if you like, and the longer-term relationship that comes from the change. So it's imperative that the business gets some kind of ownership. Inevitably, quite often, there is science in change. You've got thought leaders like John Cotter and the like who have spent their lives writing and studying change. And businesses don't necessarily know how to. They don't understand that science. And quite often, even down to a specific business change, maybe it's a centralisation, maybe it's a complete restructuring of how secretarial services are delivered. They don't know how to start. So the knowledge is not necessarily there for them to do it. The other side I've got here is assessing the evidence and visualising the change. It's the concept of what motivates people from an emotional perspective and what motivates them from an evidential perspective. So will I change because I think it's going to be a really good thing because I've been convinced it is? Or will I change because I've seen the numbers and I know that it's going to make my firm more profitable, it's going to make me more productive, it's going to make my client happier? And all the research which has been done says that that emotional element, John Cotter calls it see-feel change, is vastly more important than the evidential element. And I think in law firms, that's a real challenge. And that's a real challenge because not only do lawyers need that emotional change and reason to alter what they're doing, they also need to be have evidence. They need it proven to them that it's going to be better. So that's more of a difficulty, I think, in law firms. And lastly, culture. A couple of times today, we've had references to the general profile of the individual in a senior management position in the law firm being kind of middle-aged. And E. Joseph Crossman, who was the American entrepreneur doing mail order businesses, he actually was the one who said, middle age is where your broad mind and your narrow waist change places. And I think that is also a very kind of real challenge. So coming out of those challenges, I think there are some real themes. Down as the smallest there, but I think it's probably the most important, is the environment. the time that goes into preparation of the environment is absolutely vital. People need to understand why they have to change now. An enormous effort needs to go into preparing that environment. We ran 2 shared service projects simultaneously, and they were the first ones we did as a firm. One was a service that was looking at disclosure, so effectively taking disclosure exercises from various litigation teams throughout the business and centralising them, and having a team that was building skills, doing e-disclosure and doing it more effectively and more efficiently, and were resourced appropriately, and we were concentrating on getting the resourcing right. The other was a team that was stripping bits of administrative and legal process, very kind of low-end, sorry to use the C word, commoditised legal process, and we ran them both side by side. In the one instance, the partner who was passionate about and really wanted to make this change happen had spent an enormous amount of time telling everyone about it. She'd gone to anyone who would listen lots of times, told them how fantastic this idea was, how she saw it working, and she'd spent a lot of time preparing the ground before we'd ever even kicked the project off. And she was frustrated that it wasn't starting quickly, but that didn't stop her enthusiasm in terms of warming people up. Conversely, the partner who was in charge of the other project thought the thing could speak for itself. Basically thought it was such a brilliant thing, it was so obvious that people would see that it would work. And it's no surprise whatsoever that 3 months into each where the communication had happened, we had an absolutely full book of work. People were using the service enthusiastically, whereas where that communication and that preparation of ground hadn't happened, it had not been the case, and it'd been a real struggle. We'd actually had to go back to the drawing board and relaunch the communication exercise a lot more passionately and with a lot more effect, which was then difficult because people had either a negative or little perception and were wondering why they hadn't heard of it. I've already mentioned leadership, that need for accountability. It's absolutely essential that you have that, and you have those altruistic leaders who are going to look after the change across the whole piece. Communication. I've just mentioned to you the communication in warm-up, but it's multi-layered. It's absolutely imperative that you keep on communicating the whole of the time through any business change. The psychological research that John Cotter did basically revealed that someone needed to be told something between 4 and 5 times before they not understood it, but they accepted it and were able to relate and recall it with any degree of accuracy. If you take that message on board, a message on the intranet, an email from the managing partner or from someone senior within the business is just not going to cut it. That communication has to happen effectively, efficiently, and preferably the kind of rationale, the initial preparation of the environment, the why we're doing it, why it's important, needs to come from senior management. But that, what's in it for me, how's it going to affect me, what change is it going to make to my life, very much from line management and colleagues of the individuals concerned. Next one here is confidence. This is back to our point about evidence. If you're going to build confidence and momentum in delivering change, then actually it's really, really important that you provide those quick wins. We were very lucky to have opportunities during the course of both shared service projects when they first started to deliver small-scale projects that were going to otherwise have to be resourced by more senior lawyers who didn't want to work on them, and that gave us the ability to demonstrate quick wins and to demonstrate proof of capability. It also allowed us to refine the process, and I'll come back to that afterwards. The other thing I think is immensely important is to remove obstacles. And in removing obstacles, you take away people's excuses not to change. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Impatience, or rather patience, is also vitally important. I've already said that I think the impatient approach risks the poor solution. It kind of risks ruining your credibility. But it also ignores your focus on follow-through. So patience is an ongoing thing. Not only do you need to spend the time in getting it right before you start, it's the focus on delivery, but it's the aftermath. Too often, once a project's done, it's done, you move on, it's been a success and off you go. Well, absolutely, that focus needs to stay, and you need to patiently look at the outcome of the change and make sure it's embedded. You'll notice nowhere on that list are any words about implementation. And if you look at a lot of the sort of change theories and methodologies, you'll see that quite often implementation doesn't really factor apart from as a side product. It's taken as a given. It's our commodity in delivering what we do. So let's talk about client focus, and we've already learned a bit about that today, and Stephen has helped us look at that from a strategic perspective. And we all know that law firms are incredibly responsive to clients. It's what they're passionate about. They're very sensitive to what they perceive, and I use the word deliberately, client demands to be. So anything you do that can establish a clear line of sight and connection between the client and the business change you want to make is grist to the mill and a great way to help you prepare the environment. So it can be in the context of market analysis. So it can be, what are your competitors doing? We need to do that to remain competitive. That's what the clients are looking for. Some of the larger corporate clients are also far more mature than we are as organisations in terms of understanding business change. So using them as exemplars, particularly when you're working on client projects. Also, the sort of the war wounds, the near misses. I know that I can think of lots of situations where a firm that I've been working in or advising has effectively been in a place where it was told it nearly didn't get a tender because it hadn't operated in a particular way. And it's using those kind of war stories to help you through. I don't know how long you've all been involved in change, but if you cast your mind back to the sort of advent of case management systems when technological advances helped the C word again, sorry, commoditization of work, then if you look at that, adoption of case management systems was really difficult until clients started asking, why haven't you got one? Why can't you do the work cheaper because, or show us the controls than your case management system? Why can't you give us access to the data and documents we provide? So that kind of client-driven element. In more recent months, in looking at use of our own internal resources, we've certainly had challenges from our lawyers. Now we've got these shared services. Let's check all of our disclosure exercises through our disclosure team. Well, you can't do it because actually you have to recognise that clients want diversity. They are, as we recognise today, much more sophisticated about how they procure and what they want from their legal service providers. So, our lawyers are learning that quite often a client will demand that we use an LPO. And we may govern that relationship, we may have little control over that relationship, but they expect us to be mature in our approach and adaptable to their requirements. And finally, that kind of increase in commoditization, as we see more and more work, I mentioned the work I've been involved in, the sort of outsourcing project over the last few weeks. It was an absolute shock to our lawyers at how little value the client placed on the work that was being done. And that's not to say that we don't do better value work for the client, we do. But the client gave us ratings for the work that was that were rated on risk. And straight away we were jumping to, right, but every case in litigation has some risk. And the client says, no, it's not that risk, it's the risk to our business. We actually zero rate every single case unless there's a factor to increase that rating difference. And so the commoditization and the value the client places on it really does help you in explaining to the lawyers why it should be different. Vision as well, so vision that's connected to the client, vision that explains what you're trying to do is always a quick win. I've already mentioned the importance of short-term wins and the success in anchoring change. very early on, a large project landed on our disclosure team's lap that was nothing that they'd anticipated. It was a DSARS project, 48,000 documents, and straight away they were embroiled in an exercise to sort through and work out what was relevant for disclosure as part of the request and what wasn't. It took them 3 weeks to deliver it, and again, partly a lack of timing, but it was something we could point to in terms of there was a really successful achievement that had been delivered and proof that the product or the service worked. In tackling lawyer group resistance, I'm going to talk about some inalienable truths. So I'm not debunking myths, I'm just being really honest. You're not going to convert everyone. You will never convert everyone. You must listen, and we'll pick up that again in a second. The multi-comms channels we've spoken about, so that requirement to have lots of communication, it's consistent, it's coming from different areas of the business that help explain the change. And you must also listen and act. And one of the barriers that we found to people using these shared service teams was the fear of where fees would go. So we all judge our lawyers predominantly either on the hours that they record and or on the fees they bill. So there was a real desire not to use the shared services that they were very honest about because they were worried where the fees were going to go. So we removed the obstacle. We found a way of just attributing all of the fees back to the teams. And that helped increase uptake of the service. And it's listening to what they're saying and trying to find out why the change is being resisted and looking to get those obstacles removed. When it comes to stakeholders' competing interests, you will never step away from the fact that people will want different things from change. There will be different reasons why they're resisting. And you can't assume that even things that manifest themselves in a particular way always have the same root cause. For example, in the outsource I've spoken about, part of the fear that was displayed was in relation to the technology delivering what they expected it to deliver. So would it actually give them a quality process that echoed what they expected to see? And part of it was simply the purist view that, my goodness me, you can't commoditize that specialist legal thing that I do. And the reality is that both of those manifested themselves in the same way. And it was only by getting under the skin of that and talking to our fee earners to try and understand what it was that was stopping them or making them resist that allowed us to at least try and take some corrective action. And they both needed different types of coaxing. The one thing you must do, though, in dealing with competing interests is you must expect leadership from the partnership, and sometimes that's a hard thing to demand because you will have partners with competing interests and their teams with competing interests, and it is reasonable of you to expect them to cooperate with you and others within the business to actually arrive at some kind of compromise. And I think one of the best ways to do that, in addition to making sure you take account of any local variations, and so in our shared service teams we made some variations to process to cater for requirements from different teams. We took time to understand, but that doesn't deal with the cultural barrier. And the cultural barrier, I actually think transparency is a fantastic way to disarm people. I know, and in fact I'm looking around the room, I know there's definitely at least one person in the room I know knows what Joe Harry's window is. So Joe Harry's window, essentially two American psychologists, Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingham, hence the Joe Harry, had this thing in the 1950s. It was aimed at self-help groups. So I actually think it's quite appropriate for us today as a self-help group. Us as business change practitioners, I actually like to call it CFA. That's not Conditional Fee Agreement, it's Control Freaks Anonymous. It's an excellent tool because what it required the participants to do was look at a list of about 55 adjectives and to identify 5 or 6 that they felt related to them. Then they looked to their peer group, friends and colleagues, who did exactly the same thing. and they then map those adjectives onto this grid. And what you were left with were things that you described yourself as, regarded yourself as, so they were known to you. Adjectives that other people recognize those qualities or behaviors in you, so they were known to you and others. Then are those things that other people said about you that you didn't really like or know, and those were known to others but not you. And then there was a whole host of other stuff, and those were the adjectives that either weren't relevant, no one thought about you, or actually neither you nor your colleagues know. Now, what's the relevance of Johari's window? I think it can be used to demonstrate transparency and the benefits of transparency in a really good way. So I'm cheating, okay? I'm being honest about that straight up. If you think that the entire grid there represents everything there is connected with a business change project, so it's the business objectives, those that we're stating to everyone and those that we're not being transparent about. It's the hopes and fears of the project team and maybe some of the people behind the scenes. They're the personal agendas. So it represents everything there is to know about a business change. So the stuff that's known to you and others, you can control most of this. You can control most of it. So before today, Billy Joe said to me, can you give me a profile? So I've told her only the stuff I wanted to know, okay? So I was able to control that, but now I've turned up and I'm here. And you can figure out for yourselves that I'm devastatingly tall, dark, and handsome. So you get a degree of control over what's known to you and others, and some you don't. You have absolute control over that, what's known to you. Yeah, that's what you choose or don't choose to reveal, and that's crucially important. Also is important is what's known to others but not you, because those are the things, if you don't know about them, you can't do anything about them. If someone isn't prepared to tell you that they don't want to change or they don't want to do a particular change in role, they don't want to help you, they want to hide in a box, if they're not telling you why, and you don't understand why, you can't do anything about it. If you're getting resistance from a group of people because of a reason they're not disclosing to you, you can't do anything about it. And then finally, in the not known box, I'm kind of almost in the Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns here, is the stuff that you may not need to worry about at all, but more worryingly, it may be that no one has actually uncovered it. And my honest feeling is that if you are in a position where you start to expose more of the stuff that you don't necessarily want to, then my experience has been it starts to compel and persuade others to open up about the things that they weren't prepared to disclose, and it has a much greater prospect of this line moving and you both starting to uncover some of the issues that would otherwise potentially derail what you're trying to do. So in talking about achieving change in law firms and the sort of challenges, the one single biggest thing I would counsel anyone to do is create momentum. And you do that continuously. You do it at the start by doing the work to prepare the environment. You deal with those positive and negative emotions. I'm sure lots of you have seen the whole change curve that was originally created to look at grief reactions. It's important during that change that when people are sort of experiencing their anger and their mistrust, that you fill them full of information, that you actively engage in that, and that's part of keeping that momentum going. You make yourself available to answer queries. The leadership piece we've already picked up. Your team has to be committed, and it has to be committed throughout. Any stalling or lack of focus is potentially fatal. It's the worst enemy of any business change succeeding. Quick wins, their importance as well. They provide the evidence. They provide the evidence, and to the project team, they provide the proof that you're doing well and you're succeeding in what you're trying to achieve. So you take those, But you can't really evidence your quick wins unless you've done real groundwork in creating benchmarks and making sure that as you measure progress, you're being very vocal about that progress improving. And if it isn't, you do something about it. Not all change is successful, and you have to be grown up and sometimes to write it off as not working. But you use that good PR and you keep on doing it. You keep on doing it through the end of the project and into implementation. If you walk away at the end of a project, then that's the biggest chance that you'll let stuff drop and old habits will come back. And we absolutely saw that. We had two very successful shared service implementations, both of them getting a return on investment, but more importantly, the internal perception was the quality of what was produced was much better. And those teams are working directly with clients, and our lawyers are comfortable with them doing that because the quality is there. So that's been, the sort of value has been great. Even though that was happening, once the initial buzz drifted away, people started drifting back to doing their own stuff. So we went about looking at, metrics on use of land registry websites, who was time recording against sort of disclosure activities, just to see, to effectively police it, but also then speak to people to understand why they weren't changing their ways. Culture of continuous improvement. I think this is a much seen diagram, albeit it's a little prettier because I did it. The continuous improvement culture, my advice to you all would be talk about continuous improvement plans when you start the project. Talk about them from the outset, keep talking about them all the way through, so people never think that implementation or go live is actually the end of it, that they have a real expectation that you will be looking to monitor, to have iterative improvements, and to make sure that you continue getting better. Just a little piece of advice from David Sedaris for all of you. It's one that I certainly heed, and I still don't know how to do it, but I have definitely got a very, very long list of candidates. So thank you for listening.